Hello, I'm Cath Feely and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest event for the University of Derby's Being Human Festival. This is just one event of lots of different events that are going on across the country at the moment. Being Human is the UK's only festival of the humanities and is happening nationally and internationally. So if you want to know more about all the different events that are going on, you can go to www.beinghumanfestival.org, or you can follow them on Twitter at @beinghumanfest. Here at the University of Derby, we've been doing a range of different events that involve us working with lots of different partners across the county and city. So Derby Museums, Derby Local Studies and Family History Library, Derbyshire Record Office, and tonight as well, Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site, to reimagine, to use objects to reimagine Derby's past and to think a little bit about the relationship between Derbyshire and the wider world. So in the one of the earlier events, if you tuned in last Thursday, we looked at Herman Moll's maps of the world in the 18th century and how they showed how the process of empire building, exploitation and discovery and exploration in the 18th century. But what we're looking at today is also a set of maps, but we're moving from maps of the world to maps of the World Heritage Site. The World Heritage Site at Derwent Valley Mills was inscribed in 2001, and it was inscribed because it was seen as the mills that run down the Derwent from Matlock Bath to Derby was seen as important in the Industrial Revolution, and particularly the sites of the first factories in the world. But they were inscribed not only because of the buildings, but because of the landscape they were in. The fact that this was a largely rural landscape that then became rather rapidly industrialised. And so we see that thinking about mapping and thinking about understanding the world wasn't just something that was happening abroad, it was actually also happening in the Derwent Valley in the 18th and 19th centuries, where you see that people were trying to think about how they were relating to the landscape they were in. So what we're going to be doing today is thinking about what these maps, what this incredible collection of maps that we have of the Derwent Valley Mills can tell us about how people interacted with that landscape over the centuries. And first of all, we're going to have a talk from Adrian Farmer, who is the Heritage Coordinator of Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site, who's going to tell us what they've been doing with the maps and thinking about how we can look at them in detail and what we get from them. And then after that, we're going to actually make, hopefully, or demonstrate how you can make your own maps of the Derwent Valley Mills with the artist Ruth Gray. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to pass over now to Adrian Farmer, who's going to tell us an awful lot more about these incredible maps that we have of the Derwent Valley Mills. Thank you.
Thanks, Kath. Appreciate that. It's interesting that we have so many maps of the Derwent Valley, far more than actually you'd probably think, because particularly the Strutt family, who owned the mills at Belper and Milford in the middle of the site, they were great lovers of map. They loved recording how much they had, where it was, who the tenants were. It was there's a real richness to the maps that they were producing from the 1790s onwards. All these maps in the Record Office, I mean, there's a huge number of them. We didn't realise really how many. The Great Place scheme came forward about 3-4 years ago. We were given some funding, and part of that funding was to enable us to digitise those maps. So this is the National Lottery Heritage Fund and Arts Council England working together to provide funding for that. And the wonderful thing was, we used to like, oh, there'll be about 80 maps. If we can get those digitized, people will be able to access them online. They'll be able to see them much more clearly. But actually, there were so many more. We're still trying to digitize more maps. We've managed to secure more money from the Great Place schemes to do that, and the work carries on. And what I'm going to do now is take you through some of those maps that have already been digitized. Some of these maps literally are bigger than a living room carpet. They're huge. They're huge things. And the problem with that is that you can only unroll a certain amount at any time, and it's very hard to get in. You don't want to damage the map, so you can't really get in there very well to look at them in detail. And now we can. The first one I'm starting off with is this one. The Strut Estate maps are the ones I'm going to deal with first, and they're under D1564, which is all of the Strut Estate documents that are within the Record Office. But this one is from 1792, and it's of Milford. Now, Milford, most people probably know it. The mills have gone, but the A6 road goes through it. You cross over the River Derwent and you carry on the other side up to Belper. Well, 1792 is the absolute cusp of when everything changes in Milford. The mills have been built, but at the moment, the road, as it comes in from the south, that's at the bottom on the left-hand side, it's coming in and it's still going up the Chevin Road. I don't know if you can see the road, it's splitting, and to the right, like it does now, you go down to Soy Kitchens and the restaurant car park on the right-hand side. On the left, the only way through was up onto the Chevin and carrying on along the Chevin Road. But they were just putting a new road in at this stage as the map was being drawn up. And if you look at the top right, can you see there's the brand new bridge that was being put in? So the one that everyone crosses over the A6 now, it was having the new toll house, which is that little black block just below it, that's just been put in, and you can see as you look along the Makeney Road, it says that there's a toll house there with a garden, and the wonderful thing is that because that bridge isn't finished yet, there's a little footbridge, which was the Strut's own little footbridge over the Derwent, is still there just above it, just above the bridge. Can you see there's a thinner line crisscrossed over, and that was their footbridge that obviously was taken down once the main bridge was built. But probably my favourite feature on this first map, right at the bottom there, can you see there's a little rowing boat, and then there's a chain running across the river just below those weirs. Those weirs are that sort of those sort of V shapes above it. But that represents the chain ferry, because before that bridge was put in, you needed to use the chain ferry to cross over the river, and it's wonderful that in that map there's enough detail in there. They've put an actual boat in for people to cross over. And that's a fantastic feature on that map, and I do love it very much. That's one of the earliest. That's from 1792. Okay, we'll move on to the second map. Now this one, another favourite. This is, well, we say 1805. 1805 is when they started this map, and it records what the Strut Estate held, but it also includes other parts of Belper and Milford that weren't part of their estate. So there's a lot more setting within it, and it's their earliest estate map. Because these maps were hand drawn, so they were just adding to them. So this map was added to until 1818. So we can't actually be absolutely sure when things are added on to this map, which kind of makes it even more of interest, really. But the bit that I've shown here is of Bridge Hill House, which was the strut house on it says Ashbourne Road, but this is effectively Bridge Hill. Can you see right at the bottom on the right hand side, there's the Horseshoe Weir at Belper, which is the fantastic structure, a huge water management structure that's still there today, and there are dotted lines in the river behind it, because and that shows you the route of the river before it was all completely swamped by the building of the weir. That, of course, held back so much more water for use in the mills, and that completely swamped the old riverbank. So that's also recorded on there. You can still see it in dotted, but actually it was all river and much flooded. So that's a fantastic one. One thing I do love on this as well, I don't know if you can see, but just above the weir, on the bridge over the weir, you can see there's a little line across the road, and that's where the toll house was. I don't know if you can see, but it says Toll House Garden, and that was where people had to pay before they could continue to Wirksworth by heading straight on to the top right up Belper Lane, or turn onto the Ashbourne Road, turning left. So that's a lovely detail in there. And I'm going to keep on. There's another section of this map. If you move to the next one, you'll see that we're still on the same map from 1805 to 1818, but we've come down a little bit further. You can see the mill complex now. The round mill is that perfectly circular building that you can see within the mill complex. The mill complex does stand out very well. I think it's wonderful that they're all in such a beautiful sepia colour. The main roads are in this sepia colour. And you can see the triangle just does not exist. The roads don't work in the way that we understand the roads to work now. That things have moved. I don't know if you can see at the left hand side of Long Row, where the junction is, that road has changed, and it says Woodyard on it. It's wonderful. You can actually get in close enough, and on that map it says Woodyard and shops. And the grey building just to the right of it, it says Volunteers Drill Room, which would be the mill volunteers, the soldiers who would be looking after the site, effectively looking after the mills in case of mill wreckers. Also on Long Row, all of those houses are numbered, which was so rare in those days. You didn't number houses, you knew who lived at which house. But when you've got such a huge terrace and so many people living close together, those houses were numbered, and that's why Long Row still today is numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up one side and coming back down in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s on the other side. It was before you had evens on one side and odds on another. One other thing on this map is that you can see those houses have very, very long strips of gardens, because the struts were encouraging the mill workers to grow their own food where they could, have small animals, chickens or something along that line, pigs, because they had pigsties, and so they wanted them to use their gardens. They were healthier mill workers because they had more food, because they grew it themselves, but also they were outside in the fresh air doing even more work in their almost allotment strips, really. But it's interesting, behind those gardens, I don't know if you can see, it says extra gardens, and those were more strips that people could lease out if they wanted to have a longer strip so that they could produce even more food. People tended not to very much, and you can imagine if you'd had a long 12-hour shift at the mill, did you really want to be doing one set of gardening and then moving on to another strip to do it all again? So perhaps not. But it's interesting that feature exists on these very early mills from around 1805. OK, we'll move on to the next one. Now, this one is another estate map. Again, we're staying in Belper, but we've moved a little further south, So you can just see the tip of Long Row at the top there, but this one is from 1819. This map has a definite date to it, and it records what the Strutts own. What they don't own has just got the name of the owner on it. So William Walker owned that strip, which was south of Cluster Buildings. You didn't have William, George and Joseph Street in Belper in those days. Those three streets were just called Cluster Buildings, and those little black blocks are buildings that are they were back to back and semi-detached. So it was a cluster with 4 homes to it. And some of those had been built, not all of them, by the time this map was drawn up in 1819. One of my favourite features of this one is that right at the bottom, can you see it says Hutfall Field Footway? The Hutfall was the old village field. So when Belper was a village, it had a massive village field which went from Bridge Street up to Penn Street. It was absolutely massive. It went right up to the Common, which was at the top where Spencer Road is now, if you know that part of Belper, and down to King Street, which is now the main shopping street. And all of that land was called the Hutfall. The Strutts, Jedediah Strutt, bought more and more of the Hutfall as it was broken up as part of the enclosures, and was able to buy those and build his new village of mill workers' cottages, which is everything there at the top half of the map. But there's still at that stage a footway going through the Hutfall. So the name, it's wonderful that the name has survived on this map, and because it survived on the map, that is now Field Lane. But some new houses were built on a new close coming out of Field Lane only 3 or 4 years ago, and we were able to encourage the developers to call it the Hutfall. So the name is re-established now. It hasn't appeared since around the time of this map in the early 19th century. It's back in use again, and that was partly because it turned up on this map. So it's wonderful that we were able to point them in that direction and say, let's revive the name of the old village field. It's a wonderful name, Hutfall. At the top right, you can see hedgerow, the short rows of housing, the earliest housing for the workers. The top one, the most northerly, was called the hedgerow. Interestingly, you've got Long Row comes to a very peculiar end. It sort of trails off, and that's because that patch of land at the top there, that white patch, wasn't owned by the Strutts, so they weren't able to use it to build. That was still owned at that stage by Abraham Harrison, who was a nail master in Belper, and nail making was a big industry in the town, and would continue to be so until the end of the 19th century. So that's the 1819 map. If we move on to the next map, this is at an angle, which is slightly peculiar. But the wonderful thing about this and the next map is that they are both from a schedule from 1829. So we've moved on another 10 years. And this is a schedule of maps with details of tenants and land sizes to help the Strutts to understand what they owned and who was responsible for what. So Belper's sort of to the at the left-hand side. Milford is off to the right, so Belper Lane End is at the very far right-hand side. The reason I've included this map is because it's, I mean, apart from it being a very lovely colour, obviously it's a nice green, but you can actually get in there and look very closely at some of the names for the fields. One of my favourites, I don't know if you can see it on the far left, against the white strips on the far left-hand side, Adder Wood and Court Meadow, two of the names there of a section of the map. These are all names that have gone now. The Car, there's Crabtree Close, Sellers Meadow, all sorts of names that it's wonderful that they're here, they're on this map, and hopefully at some stage, if is any way of helping to reuse those names so that they stay alive and part of the history of the area, then I'd like to think that we're able to do that. On the far right hand side of this one, I don't know if you can see that little bit of pink on the far right hand side. There's a sort of very thin little lane that runs down to the bottom of that pink and then would have reached the river, and that is Swallowford Lane, and you can read it on the map when you close in on it. And Swallowford Lane used to take you down to a crossing over the river, and I have a feeling, I mean, I can't prove this, but it makes sense to me that it's called Swallowford because the river is deep there, and the chances are you'd probably swallow some water as you were trying to cross on that ford over the river at that stage, which is why you can see the lane doesn't quite reach the river anymore. That's where Babington Hospital was built, over Swallowford Lane. They didn't need it anymore. They had, what with the new weirs put in and water levels were changing. There were new bridges over the river. They didn't need that ford anymore. I'm sure they were very grateful to it if they had been swallowing water as part of that crossing. So, but it's gone. I mean, it had gone by then, but still Swallowford Lane has survived enough to at least be recorded on that map, which is wonderful. Just to the left of it, can you see there's a very detailed squiggle coming down from the road, what we now know as the A6, down to the river. That was the old route of what we call the Coppice Brook, but was recorded then as Belper Brook. So that must have been its name at that time. And by then it had been dug out. It was a straight route, just as it is now, but they'd recorded it. So, and I don't know if you can see there are little C's and markings to show that they've reallocated the land, because now there's the brook that was separating the land ownerships or the tenants it's not there. It's a straight line, so they've reallocated the land, and that's also recorded on the map. This one's got so much detail on it, I could talk about all day about it, but I need to move on. So let's move on to another map from that schedule. Now we're moving away now from Belper and Milford. We're going down to Derby, and the Strutts did own mills in Derby, and they are recorded within that same schedule from 1829. And you can see that Jail Brook is passing through from the left to right through the map. That is now Albert Street. If you know Derby, can you see that St Peter's Street is bottom left? Then you've got St Peter's Bridge, which is now the bottom of the Corn Market. So Jail Brook was culverted and covered. We know it better as Markeaton Brook these days. But it meant that the Strutt mills, all of those Strutt mills, obviously have gone now. The Strutt houses, most of them have gone as well. And you can see on the far right, there's the old cotton mill yard, which was in a separate parish. There's a separate parish on that side, which I think was on the left hand side is St Peter's Parish, on the right was All Saints Parish. Oh yeah, you can see it. It's written on the boundary through the brook. But the sort of orangey building that's top right, just below the guardhouse, is the old Strutt mill that William Strutt built. That, I mean, we talk about the North Mill at Belper and its early iron frame. Well, this one predates that, and this is William Strutt's building a partial iron frame and testing it out. And he tested it out on this cotton mill that the Strutts owned. It later became a silk mill, and they hired it out. It was leased out to somebody else. It did catch fire. I mean, the whole idea was about fireproofing. The interesting thing with that one was that when everyone rushed out of the building, and then somebody pointed out that William Strutt had designed it as a fireproof building. building, so that they went back in again and took all the silk out and rescued everything they needed to. It still meant the building still burnt, and still one or two people who had left it too long, they really struggled. They are having to jump out of windows and the rest. But it did mean the building took a long time to burn. It showed that William Strutt had certainly, his ideas were developing in the right direction, and it's good that mill is recorded on this schedule from 1829. The fire wasn't until 1858. That's where Osnabrück Square is now in Derby. If you know Osnabrück Square, I know it's important that we use the twinning links, and it's been renamed. It's kind of a shame that it doesn't tie in so closely to the Strutt holdings that were there back in the early 19th century. Okay, we'll move to the last map now. And this is of Willersleigh. So we're in Cromford. Willersleigh is, as you know, Willersleigh Castle was supposed to be the home of Sir Richard Arkwright. He died before it was completed, so he never actually lived in it. But this is an earlier map from 1759, before it changed hands. So this is before Arkwright arrived on the scene. It's a very beautiful map. It's when the site was owned by Edwin Lascelles. It shows smelting mills, which were by the Cromford Bridge, because if you can see Cromford Bridge quite high up there on the map across the River Derwent, there were no Arkwright mills, but there were smelting mills that predated his time, and they're recorded on that map there. And of course, there's no Willersleigh Castle, and what you have to do is, it's almost as if Richard Arkwright, in buying these lands, there was a farmhouse which was much closer to the bridge, further down the hill, but it's like he's basically walked around until he's found this perfect spot where he had a beautiful view looking down the River Derwent, but also could see Cromford village, or rather they could see him, just to remind them that he was there, and the family always would be. But just to the north of Upper Holme and Far Holme is where he built the castle in 1788, quite literally digging into the hillside, quarrying out some stone, creating a platform big enough to take Willersleigh Castle. Now, can you see that it's not, north isn't at the top? Can you see just below the bridge, there's a star compass, and north is the yellow. So if you bear that in mind, just north of Upper Holme and Far Holme, which are on the curve of that, the river, just to the left of them, was where Willersleigh Castle would be built. But this map, it has a cartouche, an ornate frame around its inscription, and you can see the compass at the bottom left there, which was just below it has got a scale. There's a lot of detail in this early 18th century map. It's rather wonderful, really, and again we found that looking closely at that map, probably can't quite see it clearly here, but there are drawings in pencil on that map, and I reckon that there's a sort of a square which could be Willersleigh Castle in there, that may, having perhaps inherited the map or whatever, they've drawn on where Willersleigh Castle's going to go, and so there's a little bit of history to the map itself. I mean, clearly there's been some kind of spillage down the middle there, that sort of pink strip, which isn't part of the map. It looks like it's an accidental addition of ink of some kind. But can you see below it Matlock New Bath, and below that Matlock Old Bath, heading over further into Matlock Bath? It's a beautiful map, and it's wonderful that we have access to it. It's now very much been digitized and made available to the public. There are so many more of these maps. We're so lucky that we have the kind of access we have to them now. Used to be that you would have to contact the record office, you'd have to ask for those maps to be brought out of storage. They were absolutely huge things, as I say, and you would have that sort of tricky problem, really, of unravelling part of it so you could find the bit you wanted. So you're forever unrolling one bit and rolling the other bit up so that you could get to a section of that map. You don't have that issue anymore. We're now in the position where you can see those maps digitally. They're available in the record office as digital copies, and then you're able to absolutely zoom in on them and pick out some fantastic features that we've missed in the past. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people have missed the greater detail in these maps. Obviously some people have, but it's been quite a job for them to do that. It's so much easier now, and hopefully that will lead to more research in the Derwent Valley Mills, so we have a better understanding of how the mills worked, the landscape that they're set in, and how that changed over time as the mills became more established. But still, that landscape worked for the mill communities and the mill owners. It's just a treat, really, to get them out and have a look at them. And I hope you've enjoyed looking through them now over this last half hour and really appreciating just the tip of the iceberg, really. You've got to book yourself in when you get the opportunity to the record office, or go online and have a look for yourself. They're a huge and wonderful resource. Thanks, Kath. I'll pass over to you now.
Well, you said it was a treat for us to look at these maps. It was an absolute treat to hear you talk about them with your immense knowledge of not only these maps, but the World Heritage Site as a whole. And it was really interesting what Adrian was saying about the detail that we see on these maps and just how closely we can get into them. And as we saw, there are names, there are drawings, there are compasses. These are beautiful things, and they also can tell us an awful lot about how people lived and how that changed over the late 18th century and into the 19th century. We would like you to help us make some new maps of the Derwent Valley Mills. And so we've asked the artist Ruth Gray to take inspiration from these maps and think about how we can make new maps involving our own memories and our own experiences of the Derwent Valley Mills. Ruth has used the Derbyshire mapping portal. Adrian was talking about you can go online and see these things. All you have to do is Google Derbyshire mapping portal, and you'll be able to have all of these maps at your fingertips. If you booked onto our Eventbrite website, you should have been sent a fact sheet that takes you through all of the steps in a sheet about how you can make your own maps. But we're also going to see a demonstration now from Ruth Gray. So I'm passing over to Ruth, who's going to show you how she's made a memory map and how you can make your own too. Thank you. Hello. Well, thank you, Ruth, for a really inspirational demonstration of how you can make your own memory map of the Derwent Valley Mills. If you make a map, we'd love to see it. So if you're on Twitter or on Instagram, please do hashtag your creations with hashtag beinghuman2020 and hashtag Derwent Valley Memory Maps. And we will make sure that you get included in a selection that will go into the archive and be part of the archive of Derwent Valley Mills maps going forward. I hope you've enjoyed today's event. I'd like to thank Adrian again for a really fascinating talk about maps, and also for making us think about how the sort of key themes that we've been looking at in these sessions of empire and exploitation and exploration are not only things that happen elsewhere, there are things that happen in our local and regional area. When the Struts were trying to dominate the area, when they were trying to buy up as much land as they could, they used maps to understand what they owned, and they used maps to control the places that they were in charge of. And so we see that maps are really important for thinking about how this area has developed and the county and city that we live in today. Thanks very much. I'd just like to draw your attention to a number of other events that we are running as part of the Being Human Festival here at Derby. And particularly, if you Google Being Human Derby, you'll find a list of upcoming events. On Wednesday, for example, we're going to be taking over the Instagram and Facebook of Derby Theatre, and we're going to be using their archive to think about who the theatre is for today and who it's been for in the past. On Saturday, we also have another event involving the Derbyshire Record Office and their collection. And we'll be looking at Lady Jane Franklin's mini museum, which she collected from all over the world, little mementos. And we'll be using that collection as an inspiration for making our own mini museums for treasures that we may have collected ourselves on nature walks and so forth in the last few months. So I'd just like to thank Adrian again for a really fascinating talk, and for Ruth for inspiring us with her own maps so that we can make our own memories and memory maps of the Derwent Valley. Thank you very much indeed.